it's a relatively straightforward chapter. We should be able to finish it this week. That's my hope. And getting us there to the end of the canto also. After this, we have 3 more chapters left. In the previous chapter, Lord Kapila had explained about bhakti in its different flavors. So he had talked about bhakti that is mixed with the gunas. He had talked about pure devotional service. He had talked about Astang Yoga, Sankhya. And he had he had answered the questions that had been put forth by his mother Devahuti. Now, in 3 chapters, 30, 31, and 32, Lord Kapila will answer the 7th question asked by Devahuti. So this is the question that she asks in the 3rd verse of the previous chapter about the birth and death of living entities. So he will essentially talk about so this chapter is about the life and the death of the living entities. Next chapter will be about the birth of living entities. Between that, and the chapter number 32, he will cover this topic in a fairly in a fairly comprehensive way. Comprehensive in the sense that he doesn't go into details, but he gives us a lot of information as is needed. So like in this chapter, he will talk about the pains of the youth and the old age and death. And he'll talk about the hellish conditions awaiting those that perform sinful activities. So the reason I said that it's a simple chapter, because if you look at our study of the Bhagavatam, there are verses that talk about the material world. There are verses that talk about the spiritual world. They tend to be simple and straightforward, right? In spiritual world, description of Vaikuntha, the disposition of the residents of Vaikuntha, pretty straightforward. Just the material world, as we'll see these chapters, straightforward. Also because we can relate to it. You know, we are currently experiencing it. The complication comes in the intersection of the two. The complication comes in when the materially embodied soul becomes an aspiring transcendentalist, right? And that's where all the nuances come, the complexity come. How to make progress? When do you know you're making progress? What are the obstacles to making progress? Why do you regress? So just to give you an analogy, that daylight is easy to understand, night is easy to understand. Twilight is difficult to understand. You can describe daylight, bright, you can see everything. You can describe night, dark, cannot see anything. Twilight, you say, well, you can see something, but not everything. You can see shapes, but you cannot see details. You may be able to see forms, but you may not be able to make out what occupies the form. And then people, say, okay, when I see a form like this, what do I think? What do I deduce? So that's one reason these chapters are simple, because they're just describing the situation of the material world. Now, just because they're simple doesn't mean that they are not stirring. They actually are. So they are a glimpse into the 5th canto. Right? 5th canto, there's a detailed description about the hellish conditions given by Sukadeva Goswami to Maharaj Parikshit. This is a glimpse into it. So it's scary stuff. It's basically stuff that becomes more scary because, like I said, we can relate to a lot of it. There are activities that Lord Kapila describes, and then when I was reading it, I said, yeah, okay, I definitely can relate to it. And then he said, this is what happens to a person who does these activities. And then your heart gets a sinking feeling that this is a possible destination. And that's the intention of Lord Kapila, that it's not that he wants to beat you up, but he wants to give you a reality check so that when you see what's there down the road, you become more serious about your devotional life. So the chapter is essentially divided into two parts. The first 18 verses talk about the life and death of a materialist. And after that, from verse 19 to 34, 16 verses, they talk about the post-death experience of a materialist. Okay, so we'll begin with the first verse, Canto 3, Chapter 30, verse 1. Kapiluvacha tasye tasya jano nunam nayam vedurivikramam kalimano pibalino vayuriva ghanavalihi. The personality of Godhead said, a mass of clouds do not know the powerful influence of the wind. I'm sorry, as a mass of clouds do not know the powerful influence of the wind, a person engaged in material consciousness does not know the powerful strength of the time factor by which he is being carried. So in the first three verses, Lord Kapila will describe the power of time, how it destroys everything, and it destroys even the happiness of the person, replacing it with lamentation. And this section of the Bhagavatam is also similar to I haven't personally read Garud Puran, but apparently it's similar to Garud Puran, where the life of a materialist and destinations are described in details, along with the description of the hellish planets. So as I mentioned, the previous chapters described activities that were performed in the modes with the presence of bhakti, right? And that's why we spent some time trying to figure out the overlap. Bhakti in the mode of ignorance, bhakti in the mode of passion, what are the symptoms? How do you distill the mode away? How do you go from the mode of ignorance to passion? How do you reconcile the fact that bhakti is transcendental to the modes, yet we say it's bhakti in the mode of ignorance? So we spent quite some time talking about the intersection of material and spiritual aspects. Now we will talk about the presence of the modes without the influence of bhakti. So in addition to bringing about, so what this will actually do is, this will, for one thing, it will give us a start picture of what happens to a person who does not take to bhakti. It also will bring the impact of the bhakti in the life of a person, right? So in order to deduce the impact of something, you take it away. So you have sugar in water, and somebody says that, what's the taste of sugar? So one way is you give the person sugar, and the other way is that you remove the sugar from the water and give the person water, right? And that way the person can say, okay, this is water with sugar, so sugar is sweet. So this will also show us the nature of the impact of bhakti. So two things it will show us. the destination of a person who rejects bhakti, and the destination of a person who accepts bhakti. Similar point is made in Bhagavad Gita in the 17th chapter. Right, when Arjuna asks Krishna, the very first verse in the 17th chapter, that what happens, what is the situation of people who worship according to their own imagination? So these are people, and so what does Krishna answer? That they're either in the mode of goodness, passion, or ignorance, which is essentially the modes. So without bhakti, essentially a person is being driven by the modes. In this verse, Lord Kapila uses the analogy of clouds swept by the wind to indicate the influence of time. And interestingly, the same analogy used by Bhishma Dev when he is speaking to Yudhishthir. This is in the first canto, 9th chapter, where he says that, in my opinion, this is all due to inevitable time. So he's talking about his own situation, that he's lying on a bed of arrows, about to die. So he says, in my opinion, this is all due to inevitable time, under whose control everyone in every planet is carried, just as the clouds are carried by the wind. He actually uses the same analogy. So let's look at this analogy. So the clouds in themselves are large and freestanding. Now, they may not be aware of wind, but that does not protect the wind from acting upon them. Now, can the clouds say that I choose not to be affected by the wind? On its own, it can never say that. So regardless of whatever the cloud, if somehow the cloud even becomes aware that there is this wind coming and it is blowing me, and it says, okay, I don't like this wind blowing me, so I won't be blown by the wind. What can the cloud do? Nothing. The wind will still blow it. So whether the cloud is aware of it or not, it will still be blown by wind. Whether the jiva is conscious of the influence of time or not, time will still act upon it. And what is the influence of time? So this we did in the last chapter. Maybe somebody can share. What is the most distinctive impact of time on jiva? The most primordial impact of time on jiva.
Is it not the distracting factor, Prabhu?
I'm sorry, Sang Prabhu, can you repeat that?
Is it distracting factor?
Close, very close. Something else though, very close. So yes, as Sayang Prabhu is saying, the destruction, and how does that destruction, the awareness of the destruction manifest in us as fear. So time instills fear in everyone at all points of time. So there is fear of losing your possessions. There is fear of losing your health. There is fear of losing your loved ones. There is fear of death. So even if a person is not aware of time, but he will be conscious of the influence of time, which is fear. So And we know that this is because of avidya, abhinivesh. Abhinivesh is just the sense of ownership. Now, on the other hand, a person who is absorbed in Krishna consciousness, that fear goes away. So that fear goes away not because time is not destroying the person anymore, but for him, time is nurturing something far more important, which is bhakti. So you see the beauty of bhakti, that the same thing that was instilling fear in you now becomes your friend. Now you can use your time to perform devotional service, to serve the devotees, serve the deities, read the scriptures. So the for the devotee, tomorrow is yet another opportunity to make further advancements. And same point is made by Shaunaka Rishi to Sutta Goswami right at the beginning of the Bhagavatam in the second canto. He says that both by the rising and the setting, both by rising and by setting, the sun decreases the duration of life of everyone, except one who utilizes the time by discussing the topics of the all good personality of Godhead. Now, it's not that devotees don't grow old or they do not die, but they do not fear it. So it's said that when the poison of the snake goes away, it's a snake in name only. Because if you look at a snake, it's a beautiful creature. I don't know if you've seen snakes. We used to have snakes in our backyard. And actually, most of the snakes are non-poisonous, at least in India. And they're really beautiful. They have these fascinating crisscross patterns. And of course, we didn't know which were poisonous, not poisonous. We were scared of all of them. But if you know for sure that the snake was not poisonous, they're beautiful. So for a devotee, time is there, but that poison of destruction is gone away. So time becomes their friend. Okay. So in so just continuing this topic a little bit more, it's kind of the foundation of the chapter, that one may ask that why doesn't a person who is in a fearful state look for opportunities to address that situation? Because at least in the material state, one of the most predominant instincts is that of self-preservation. So when a person sees that time is trying to destroy, and then they realize that bhakti will protect them, why don't they just run into bhakti? And forget about love for Krishna or serving devotees, forget about all that. Just from a materialistic perspective, right? A person sees that I am being attacked by time. Time is killing me, and I have the shelter that will protect me. Let me take to it. Now, one obvious answer to that is that there is a lack of faith in the protection offered by bhakti. So that's one reason. Why is that lack of faith there? And the lack of faith is essentially because of prior impressions. So in the 7th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, Ichha dvesha samuttena dvandamohena bharata sarva bhutani samoham sargayanti parantapa. Sarva bhutani samoham. That all living entities are born into delusion, bewildered by Ichha dvesha samuttena dvandamohena, this duality of ichha and dvesh. So where is this duality coming from? Samoham. From this bewilderment is coming from the previous lifetimes. So that is why the person is already conditioned to act in a certain way because of their activities in the previous lives. So this dvanda moha, this attachment to the dualities, is inherited because of samskars, and this leads to samoham. This leads to bewilderment. And when samoham is there, then even if somebody shows you nectar, you will think it's poison. So the solution is that wipe out these unfavorable impressions. When the unfavorable impressions are wiped out, Dvanda Moha is wiped out, Samoham is wiped out, and the person will now take to Bhakti. And how do you wipe out this Dvanda Moha? How do you wipe out this attraction to dualities? That is where the mercy of the Lord coming through the devotee manifests. That the person on his own will, because as long as the person is under Dvanda Moha, he will not be able to accept any other solution. Right? So at the temple, I remember once we had a guest, and just to show the guests some special attention, we offered Mangalarti sweets, a rasgulla. The person had never eaten a rasgulla. So he looked at the rasgulla, and we were like we're giving him, not just because it is Mahaprasad, but this is rasgulla. This is like, people, in our temple, people, people savor it. But he had never eaten a rasgulla. So he looked at it fine. Now, hopefully after he ate it, he developed some attraction to it. But never eaten a rasgulla, never cared about it. Never performed bhakti, no attraction to it. But once the person has eaten a rasgulla, then he will look for opportunities. Once a person has performed some bhakti, he gets a taste for the sweetness, and then the process begins. So Lord Kapila is describing this duality, and this is not the Dvanda Moha duality, but the duality between eating a rasgulla and not eating a rasgulla, between the sweetness of devotional service and the bitterness of material life. So that at least at an intellectual level, the reader gets an understanding. Somebody reads that this rasgulla is fabulous, right? At least there is some desire that let me try and go and try it out. So essentially, he is trying to break that cycle. So these chapters are not there to condemn us, to criticize us. Lord Kapila doesn't need to do that. If he wanted to do that, he would have just kept quiet. We are good enough in doing that ourselves. Every day we do it, right? Every day that we turn away from Krishna, we are doing it. So these chapters are not meant for that. The chapters are actually meant to give us a side-by-side glimpse of nectar and what's the opposite of nectar?
Bitter.
Bitter, yeah? Like side-by-side of nectar and poison. I think poison would be a word. So he's giving us a side-by-side description of nectar and poison, just so that we get an opportunity to taste the nectar, not to condemn the poison that much. Because he does do a lot of it. You'll see it in the next chapters. By the time you read it, you'll be like, you'll start feeling nihilistic. That is, my life even worth living, after Lord Kapila has described my life in this way. So that's why Srila Prabhupada explains this, it's there to reassure us also to, so that we don't misjudge the intentions of the personality of Godhead. Okay, verse 2. Yam yamarte upadate dukhena sukhetave tam tam dunoti bhagavan pumancho chati yakrate. Whatever is produced by the materialist with great pain and labor for so-called happiness, the Supreme Personality, as the time factor, destroys. And for this reason, the conditioned soul laments. And Prabhupada says that the main function of time factor is to destroy everything. And then he says from history, we can see. So we do see that there were great empires, there were great kings. Which was the greatest empire in existence, at least from a historical perspective, was the empire of what's that person?
The Roman Empire.
Hmm?
Is it the Roman Empire?
No. The greatest empire was the descendant of Kublai Khan.
Oh.
From Mongol. His empire stretched all the way from eastern part of Asia till Central Europe. So it was the largest single contiguous empire. He's gone now. His empire is gone. So everything happens. We knew at one point the British Empire, they said that that the sun never sets on the British Empire. And now there's so much pollution in UK. They say the sun never rises there. So with the factor of time, things change. At one point, Bharatvarsh was ruling the globe, and now they're confined to a small area. So that's the nature of time. And Prabhupada says that the foolish materialist cannot understand that they're simply wasting time in producing material necessities, which are destined to be vanquished in due course of time. Verse 3. Yad adhruvasya dehasya sanubandhasya dhurmati Dhruvani manyate mohan grahakshetra vasunicha. The misguided materialist does not know that his very body is impermanent and that the attractions of home, land, and wealth, which are in relationship to that body, are also temporary. Out of ignorance only, he thinks that everything is permanent. So this essentially means that Sambandha Gyan is missing. That which belongs to the body, he considers to be permanent, and that which is eternal, he considers it to be irrelevant. Now, why does the person consider the adhruvasya? Adhruvasya is temporary, so he considers the adhruvasya to dhruvani. So he considers the temporary to be permanent. So why can't such a person apply simple empirical intelligence and deduce that all material things are temporary and time will eventually take it away? Empirical, I'm saying, because he sees that around him. The person can open a book of history and read it. If he doesn't want to look at the book of history, he can simply look around his own life. He will see rich people becoming poor and poor people becoming rich. Famous people fading into oblivion and famous people committing suicide. So he will see all these things happening without even having to the constitutional nature of the soul is to be Sat, Chit, and Ananda. So the soul can be covered, but it cannot forget its constitutional position. The soul is not used to dying, so it cannot accept death. The soul is not used to misery, so it cannot accept the premise of lack of happiness. The only thing is that it is applied incorrectly. Srila Prabhupada, he once wrote an article saying that
Prabhu, we are losing you, Prabhu. We already lost you twice.
Wow. Okay, let me. Starting the 30th chapter of third canto, description by Lord Kapila.
Can you hear me, Haribol?
Yeah, Prabhu, we can hear you now. So very perfect, actually.
Okay.
Is this
Sorry about that.
from-
I have joined in from my phone. I rebooted my laptop. Sometimes that fixes the issue, but apparently it did not. Okay. So I was saying that so in this context, Srila Prabhupada once wrote an article called "Who is Crazy?" basically to talk about who is crazy. The people who are materialists, they say that these devotees are crazy. And he was like, really, are they crazy or are you crazy? And in the purport, he writes something similar, that the materialists think that persons engaged in Krishna consciousness are crazy fellows, wasting time by chanting Hare Krishna. But actually, he does not know that he himself is in the darkest region of craziness because of accepting his body as permanent. And in relation to his body, he accepts his home, his country, his society, and all other paraphernalia as permanent. So just in terms of the who is crazy part, there is a prayer by King Kulashekara in Mukundamala Stotra, where he says that my mind cannot turn from Shri Krishna's lotus feet even for a moment. So let my dear ones and other relatives criticize me. My superiors accept or reject me as they like. The common people spread evil gossip about me, and my family's reputation be sullied. For a madman like me, it is honor enough to feel this flood of love of Godhead, which brings such sweet emotions of attraction for my Lord. So in Mukundmala Stotra, King Kulakshetra saying is that by all means call me crazy, if that craziness is feeling the sweet emotions of attractions for my Lord. Prabhupada in the purport continues, he says that in another part of the Srimad Bhagavatam, the acceptance of the body as oneself, the acceptance of others as kinsmen in relationship to this body, and the acceptance of the land of one's birth as worshipable are declared to be products of an animal civilization. The Prabhupada preaches very, very boldly. And the reason he's able to make these bold statements is because they're based on scriptures. So Prabhupada would condemn. So Prabhupada, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he condemned nationalism at a time when nationalism was at its highest fervor. Right? In the first conversation, Prabhupada, who at that time was a follower of Mahatma Gandhi, he said that our country is still under foreign dominion. So we need to focus on that. And Bhaktisiddhanta said that this is foolishness, because the basic dominion that you are under is that of death. And whether you're being ruled by a foreign government or a local government, you're not going to be escaping that. Right? And Prabhupada would actually criticize later on. He criticized Gandhi for being too nationalist under the guise of spirituality. So he presented himself as a spiritualist, but essentially he was promoting nationalism, and Bhagavatam condemns it. Prabhupada actually here is quoting this verse appears in the 10th canto, chapter 84, verse 13. So this is the sages' teachings to the people assembled at Kurukshetra. And they say that one who identifies himself as the inert body composed of mucus, bile, and air, one who assumes his wife and family are permanently his own, one who thinks an earthen image or the land of his birth is worshipable, one who sees a place of pilgrimage as merely the water there, but who never identifies with himself with, feels kinship with, worships or even visits those who are wise and spiritual truth. Such persons are no better than a cow or an ass. Strong preaching. Okay. Verse 4. Jantur Vaibhava tasmin yam yam yonin anuvrajed tasyam salabate nivritim na virajyate. The living entity in whatever species of life he appears finds a particular type of satisfaction in that species, and he is never averse to being situated in such a condition. So 2 verses, 4 and 5, talks about the extent of this conditioning. That it's not only the humans who have an exalted, relatively exalted relationship with the material world, but any species of life. They're actually equally happy in that. So we may look upon another species and say, this is so abominable, that this is a worm that is living in stool. What an abominable condition. Not to the worm. To the worm, it's its house, and it probably has a family, it has a wife, it has food. So it's happy over there. And that is the reason that the jivas will stay in the material world for eternity, because they do not realize that they are suffering. So Krishna says that this world is dukhalayam, right? He makes the statement, and we see that, but yet we say that there is happiness and there is distress. So we condition ourselves to tolerate the distress while anticipating happiness. In Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, Yehi samparsh jab hoga. That in every bhoga, in every happiness, there is that seed of distress. That in every bhoga, there is dukkha. So happiness comes with distress built into it. And it may not be immediately evident to the person. It may not be immediately evident to the person. But if the person is thoughtful, if the person is retrospective, in the sense that he looks into his life, that I did this, did I get happiness? I came to the US looking for happiness. Did I get happiness? In the US, then I went after this job looking for happiness. Did I get happiness? Then I did this. Did I get happiness? So a person who is thoughtful and who has the ability to step outside his own body, his own life, and examine it impartially, then the person can see it. But very few people are able to do that. And because essentially, Krishna has created the material world in this way. He has created the material world for the conditioned jiva to enjoy. Now, the question may be that, okay, if Krishna has created the material world to enjoy, then why does he call it dukhalayam? Why is there yehi samparsh jab hoga? Why is there unhappiness in every happiness? So that's not because of Krishna. That unhappiness is because of jiva. Krishna has done his best to create an enjoyable environment for the conditioned jiva. So sometimes we think that Krishna, out of malice, so the jiva turns away from Krishna. Krishna says, okay, let me show you now. So he throws us down to the material world, and then out of malice, he basically puts all these hidden traps and thorns and there. That's not true. Because if Krishna wanted us to suffer, then nobody can do a better job at it than Krishna. He could have directly created the material world as one of the hellish planets, right? Then there would be no question of any bhoga, only suffering. And he could have created something even worse than these hellish planets, where the suffering was unimaginable. If Krishna wanted to, right? He can do it, but he does not. He creates the material world as a place of enjoyment. The suffering is because of the intrinsic nature of the jiva. That the nature of the jiva is as intrinsic to him as the nature of Krishna is intrinsic to him. Right? So just like Krishna is eternal, the jiva is eternal. And just like the jiva is eternal, the nature of the jiva is also eternal. So the nature of the jiva is Satchitanand. Krishna may create something that might give temporary Satchitanand, but the eternal nature of the jiva is different. So the miseries in the material world are despite all the attempts of Krishna to give happiness to the jiva. So we are not suffering really because of the gross body, or because of the subtle body, or even because of the destructive influence of time. The reason we are suffering is that we are going against our constitutional position. Everything else is unfolding from there. The only reason that we see flashes of enjoyment is because of the mercy of Krishna. So all the suffering over here is because of the jiva. And all the happiness is because of Krishna, even in the material world. The jiva's nature is not to be in the material world. That's his eternal nature. And Krishna is eternal, jiva is eternal. So just like Krishna never came into existence, the jiva never came into existence. It has always been in existence. Its nature has always been to be happy in service to Krishna. Srila Prabhupada gives in the purport a slightly more technical description where he talks about the nature of the how the jiva gets entrapped. He talks about the Prakesh Patmika, the Prakshek Patmika and the Avarnatmika. So two things happen to the jiva. So Avarnatmika is covering. That first thing is that the jiva is made to forget about its constitutional position. And the Prakshepatmika is the throwing. And then the jiva assumes a different nature. Despite these two things that are happening, the jiva's intrinsic nature does not change. And that is why it continues to suffer. Okay, verse 5. Narakasto pideham vai na pumam styaktumechati narakyam nirvatau satyam deva maya vimohitaha. The conditioned living entity is satisfied in his own particular species of life, which, deluded by the covering influence of the illusionary energy, he feels little inclined to cast off his body. I may have misread something. So let me read the verse again. The conditioned living entity is satisfied in his own particular species of life, while deluded by the covering influence of the illusionary energy, he feels little inclined to cast off his body, even when in hell, for he takes delight in hellish enjoyment. So the previous verses, they spoke about the forgetfulness of the jiva while he is enjoying. This verse is increasing the emphasis of the previous verse, that even when the jiva is suffering, he still takes delight. The famous analogy that Srila Prabhupada would give us of a camel eating thorns, and the thorns cutting the mouth of the camel, bleeding, and the camel enjoying that. So the influence of Maya is so strong that not only in happiness, but even in distress, the jiva takes delight. So Vishwanath Chakravarti, he says that the enjoyment of hell is the food, association with women, and items one may obtain there. And Prabhupada, he gives that example of Indra being cursed by Brahaspati to become a stool-eating hog. And so at one point there is Indra, Amravati, constantly he has a very, very high standard of life. Apsaras and Gandharvas and big demigods constantly bowing before him. And from there, he becomes a stool-eating hog. And Brahma comes to him and says, come back. No, okay, the duration of the curse is over, now come back. Indra says, no, thank you, I'm happy over here. I have my stool, I have my hog, I have my family, I have my piglets, I'm satisfied over here. That's the nature of Maya. That it's not that it gives you the sense of happiness only when the situation is conducive. Even in the most averse situation, it will force you to seek happiness. So Prabhupada says Krishna is personally canvassing. Give up everything in this material world, come to me and I shall give you all protection. Right? This is the 1866. And the jiva says, no, thank you. We are quite all right. So when we look at this incident of Indra becoming a stool-eating hog and refusing to go back, we laugh at it. That poor Indra, look at what happened to him. But actually we are same situation. Krishna is coming to us and saying, come back. And we are saying, no, thank you. I'm happy with the stool. I'm happy with the other piglets. And I'm happy with all the malodorous, insidious things that are happening around us. Next verse. Atmajaya sutagara pashu dravin bandhushu nirudmula hridya atmanam bahumanyate. Such satisfaction with one's standard of living is due to deep-rooted attraction for body, wife, home, children, animals, wealth, and friends. In such association, the conditioned soul thinks himself quite perfect. So the previous verse described the situation that whether in happiness or in distress, the conditioned soul is still attracted to the material situation in life. Verses 6 to 8 will try to explain the why part of it. That was the what part of it. This will say, why is it that they are attracted? So what does this verse say? That deep-rooted attraction for family, especially women and children. This is what is the why part of it. Similar verse is spoken by Maharaj, spoken by Sutta Goswami when he's describing the renunciation of Maharaj Parikshit. This is second canto, chapter 4, verse 2. That Maharaj Parikshit, as a result of his wholehearted attraction for Lord Krishna, was able to give up all deep-rooted affection for his personal body, his wife, his children, his palace, his animals, like horses and elephants, his treasury house, his friends and relatives, and his undisputed kingdom. Right? So these two verses side by side, they present the stark difference between a materialist and a spiritualist. So Maharaj Parikshit was able to nityam viruddham mamatam, that he was able to give up everything because of his nityam, because of his constant viruddham, constant deep-rooted mamatam for Krishna. And the conditioned soul is not able to do it because of bahu atmana. That bahu atmana means that thinking very highly of oneself. So the attraction of the conditioned soul is not just to the body. It is to that which is linked to the body. So that's how this attraction becomes a web. Right? It's easy to break a rope, but it is difficult to break a web because the ropes are intervened over and over again. So that single rope of attraction to the self, it spreads out like a mesh. That from myself, there is my Atmaja, that which has been produced from my body, that which is linked to my body, my children, my wife, my family. And that mesh, it extends larger and larger. From the family, it becomes society. From the society, it becomes the country. From the country, it becomes the world. The mood that we see in Maharaj Parikshit, it's also displayed by Maharaj Bharat. So Maharaj Bharat is described as Jahu Yuvaiva Malvad Uttam Shloka Lalasa. So Uttam Shloka Lalasa, that because of his love for the Lord, Jahu Yuvaiva Malyat, that he gave up his deep-rooted attractions. Malavad means like stool. And Maharaj Bharat was similar to Maharaj Parikshit. He was the emperor of the world, in his prime, family, fame, everything, but Malavad. He gave it up as stool. So Vishwanath Chakravarti, when he comments on this verse, he says that why is this analogy of stool being used over here? And he gives 3 reasons. He says that if you do not give up stool, it will cause discomfort in your body, constipation. Second, if you give up the stool, the person feels extreme relief. Third, once a person gives up stool, he does not go back to take it in again. So that is the relationship of a transcendentalist with the material world. And that is the promise that is given to the materialist also. As long as you're holding all these attractions inside you, it's like holding all the stool inside you. Once you give it up, it is relief. And after you have given up, there is no reason for you to go back and take it in again. So that is the nature of detachment that makes it worthy of glorification. Verse 7. Sandayaman sarvanga esham udva hanadina karotya virtam mudho duritani durashayaha. Although he is always burning with anxiety, such a fool always performs all kinds of mischievous activities with a hope which is never to be fulfilled in order to maintain his so-called family and society. So the sequence of events that Lord Kapila will paint in verse 7 and after that continuing in verse 9 and 10 is this constant anxiety to maintain family life results in the person performing sinful activities, which will then result in the person going to hell. Prabhupada says the family we maintain is created by Maya. It is the perfected reflection of the family in Krishna Loka. In Krishna Loka, there is also family, friends, society, father and mother. Everything is there, but they are eternal. Later he says that it is said, as long as we are attached to this asat, temporary non-existent society and family, we are always full of anxieties. The materialist does not know that the family, society, and friendship here in this material world are only shadows, and thus they become attached. Naturally, their hearts are always burning. But in spite of all this inconvenience, they still work to maintain such false families because they have no information of the real family association with Krishna. And the reason that people don't give up, because everybody experiences pain through family. So I know at my work, it's half humorous, half serious. But generally after Thanksgiving or Christmas, we'll see people rolling their eyes. And we'll say we have a good vacation. Yeah, good vacation. But family. And they'll just roll their eyes or shrug. So it's one of those things. They know that family gets together at this time and stuff happens and people quarrel, but they'll do it again next year. So the analogy that is given here is that just like a person under anesthesia will not feel pain, but prematurely removing anesthesia will cause unbearable pain. So there is a certain method to this material madness, that if a person prematurely gave up all this, it's like a person is going through surgery and the effect of anesthesia wears off. Then you can imagine the amount of pain that the person will go through. So until the person is in a position to renounce, such severing of ties goes against the self-preservation of the soul. Right? So today I read this and I say, okay, I understand. Family is bad, society is bad, country is bad, and I cut ties from everything and go to the forest. But I will not be happy there, right? Because this is the classic example of the mithyachara that Krishna talks about in the 3rd chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. So the purpose of these verses is not to have us prematurely renounce. The purpose of these verses is to gradually work towards the stage where even when the anesthesia is removed, there is no pain. So even when the illusion is removed, there is no material hankering. Verse 8. Akshipata tamendriya shri strinam asatinam chamayaya raho rachitya lapatpahi shishunam kalabhashinam. He gives heart and senses to a woman who falsely charms him with Maya. He enjoys solitary embraces and talking with her. And he's enchanted by the sweet words of the small children. So previous verse talked about the constant anxiety of the materially vested person. This verse talks about the impetus that is making the person go on and on. And this is the impetus. The pleasure provided by the opposite sex and children. Now it says that he enjoys with women, but this is equally applicable either ways. Most of the verse predominantly use the masculine pronoun, but the understanding is that for the most part, it is applicable to feminine also. So she enjoys charms with him in Maya, and she's enchanted by the sweet words of the small children, equally applicable. Bhaktisiddhanta once he wrote an article in the Harmonist when he saw that his disciples in the Gaudiya Math, they were becoming complacent living in the ashram. So he wrote an article calling them as Mattamedhis. So we know Grahamedhis, right? They are those who are complacent in the Graha, in the house. And the Mattamedhis were basically people, they were just living in the mattas. They were just enjoying a complacent life there. So the principle is the same, that until Krishna is the center of the life, all the activities are shackling. And on the contrary, when Krishna is present, then any ashram is the source of liberation. Whether it is Grahastha or Brahmachari, generally Grahastha ashram is condemned. We see here, this is essentially Grahastha ashram that's been condemned. But if Krishna is there, the Grahastha ashram becomes far, far superior to the Mattamedhis. So Srila Prabhupada has a strong purport in this. He says that in the words Strinam, Asatinam indicates womanly love is just to agitate the mind of the man. Actually, in the material world, there is no love. Both the woman and the man are interested in their sense gratification. For sense gratification, a woman creates an illusory love, and the man becomes enchanted by such false love and forgets his real duty. When there are children, as a result of such a combination, the next attraction is to the sweet words of the children. The love of the woman at home and the talk of children make one a secure prisoner, and thus he cannot leave his home. Such a person is termed in Vedic language as Grahamedhi, which means one whose center of attraction is home. And then Prabhupada contrasts with Grahastha, who is in that ashram with a wife and children and house, but the difference is that the center is Krishna. So again, one thing is that in the Bhagavatam, we see verses that glorify the spiritual life, and then we condemn, and that verses that like these that condemn the material life. People generally are more inspired by positive things. So they're more inspired by verses that glorify spiritual life. But at the same time, there needs to be a strong aversion to the material life. However, if the only thing that is there is a strong aversion to the material life, what will the person become? He'll become an impersonalist, or it will result in nihilism or voidism. So which is why the Bhagavatam talks about both things. That while it is condemning the material life, it is glorifying the spiritual life. The purpose of the Bhagavatam is to replace one's material conception with spiritual conception. So most of the Bhagavatam is there to glorify the spiritual existence, but recognizing the need for detachment, it also speaks here and there about these verses that help foster material detachment. Next verse. Greshu kutadharmeshu dukhatantre svatandrataha kurvan dukha pratikaram sukhvan manyate grihi. The attached householder remains in his family life, which is full of diplomacy and politics, always spreading miseries and controlled by acts of sense gratification. He acts just to counteract the reaction to all his miseries. And if he can successfully counteract such miseries, he thinks that he is happy. So this verse is Lord Kapila describing the definition of happiness for a materialist. So what is happiness for a materialist? The absence of suffering. Ultimate happiness is no suffering. So the person is not even aspiring for real happiness. And in order to negate the influence of suffering, the person performs so many activities that is sowing the seeds of his own future suffering. So we see how it is a self-defeating cycle. That there are sufferings that are coming. In order to protect himself from that suffering, the person, he performs activities that results in kuta dharmeshu. Kuta dharmeshu is future suffering, and dukha tantreshu. And suffering causes suffering for others also. So this is essentially a condemnation of the notion of subjective happiness. That the person in a prison house may be happy at the prospect of hot cereal in breakfast. Right, but that does not, so this is subjective happiness, relative happiness. So the person is in a prison, he's in an abominable condition, his freedom has been restricted, he probably gets beaten up, but he's told that tomorrow morning there is hot cereal for breakfast. And the person is happy about it. Right, so this is relative, it's very subjective. But this does not mean that there is no objective happiness, right? So subjective is relative, objective is absolute. This does not mean that there is no absolute happiness. So the objective reality is the person's thinking that, why am I even in this prison? Why do I care about hot cereal for breakfast tomorrow? If I'm out of the prison, I don't even have to worry about all of this. That is spiritual enlightenment. So Prabhupada says that in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna certifies the material world as an impermanent place that is full of miseries. So this is Prabhupada quoting Bhagavad Gita 8:15, where Krishna says this material world is dukhaliyam ashashvatam. And then he says there is no question of happiness in this material world, either individually or in terms of family, society, or country. If something is going on in the name of happiness, that is also illusion. So why do we say it is illusion? Because when a person is experiencing happiness, it is real. Why do we say it is illusion? Because of kuta dharmeshu. Because that happiness is going to give you future suffering. Right? So that is why it is considered to be an illusion. Okay, I'll do one more verse and then we'll stop for any discussion. Arther-apaditer gurvya himsayate tataschatan pushnati yesham poshena shesha bhogyatyadah swayam. He secures money by committing violence here and there. And although he employs it in the service of his family, he himself eats only a little portion of the food thus purchased. And he goes to hell for those for whom he has earned the money in such a irregular way. So even that happiness is not the person's own happiness. The person is actually committing all these sins for the happiness of others. So when a person is making money or securing assets, it is typically to secure for their friends and family. Right? So, and if so firstly, that happiness is now actually predicated on somebody else. Right? You commit sinful activities, you buy a house, you give it to your family, and now your happiness is dependent on them. If they treat you badly, then it is a lose-lose situation. That you're committing sinful activities, you're sacrificing your own happiness in the hopes of securing the happiness of others who actually are creating even more unhappiness for you. So Prabhupada says, Vishnu Chakravarti says that the essence of this verse is that in the material world, happiness is very, very rare. So this is one of the realizations in the Ramayana of Ratnakar Dayasu, right? When he had waylaid Narad Muni actually, he asked him to go and talk to his family members to find out if they will share the sinful reactions. And he said, of course they will, because all that I'm doing is for them only. And the family members refuse. And then he goes on to become Sage Valmiki. Prabhupada says that there is a Bengali proverb, the person for whom I have stolen accuses me of being a thief. So I was not able to find what the proverb is. If anybody can find, it'd be good. He goes on to say that the family members for whom an attached person acts in so many criminal ways are never satisfied. Now, bear in mind that when Lord Kapila or Srila Prabhupada is talking about criminal ways, they're not really talking about breaking the law, right? We may think that, well, I'm earning money through legal ways, not through criminal ways. This does not apply to me. But the criminality over here is acting against a constitutional position. That's the criminality over here. So that is why this is covering everybody. And then Prabhupada gives an explanation of why does he do it. Prabhupada says that by serving others, he is falsely thinking that he is the master. Right? This is a very insightful analysis by Prabhupada, that why does the person, he's committing sinful activities for the pleasure of his family. He's seeing that the family is condemning him, but he still does it. Why? Because he's thinking that he is the master. So the head of the family says that I'm the master of the family. The leader of a nation thinks that he's the master of the nation. But actually, all they are doing is serving Maya and gradually going to hell. So Prabhupada says, therefore, a sane man should come to the point of Krishna consciousness and engage in the service of the Supreme Lord, applying his whole life, all his wealth, his entire intelligence, and his full power of speaking. Okay, I'll pause here and I'll stop here and see if there's any discussion. Okay, if not, we'll
Hare
stop.
Prabhu. Sorry, Prabhu. Hare Krishna. This is Nandagopal Das.
Hare Krishna.
Prabhu, I just have
Yes,
one question. You were explaining about how this material world, the misery is because of our what do you call rebelliousness or acting against the constitutional position, whereas the happiness is the mercy of Krishna. Even in the middle of all this miserable condition, when we feel happy, it's because of the mercy of Krishna. So you were nicely explaining that. I was thinking that if there was no happiness at all in this material world, then we will completely forget going back to Godhead, because we will not know what it means to be happy. In other words, this happiness gives a glimpse of there must be something else which I would like to get. Is it the right understanding? I'm thinking like, if a person is given some little bit of taste of something, then he wants more of it. If he doesn't have the taste of that at all, then there's no way he will have that feeling of going to get that more taste of it, and therefore there is no way of that person going back to home, back to Godhead. So I was thinking that happiness is given by Krishna mercifully, so that it reminds us of our eternal happiness. Somewhere it is there, and so therefore we will aspire for that. Is there any scriptural evidence for that, or is it right understanding?
It's definitely the right understanding. I'm trying to see if there is specific verses that cover this. Prabhu,
if we take the example of Dhruva Maharaj, when Lord Vishnu appeared first to give him the taste, and then he disappeared. You can take this example.
Yes, you mean Narad Muni, right?
Yes, Narad Muni.
Yeah. Thank you, Prabhu. That's a good example. Krishna gave a glimpse of the taste, and then took it, and then Krishna says that I gave it to increase your longing for it. So there's your answer, Prabhu. But your assertion is completely correct. That yes, there is the carrot and the stick. Krishna is the carrot, and we are the stick. So if you step back and look at the purpose of the scriptures, then the whole process of karma kand, material happiness, is ultimately to ask us, or to see if we can then seek for higher happiness. So we get the taste of material happiness of karma kand, and then we say that what else is there? And we say, okay, heavenly planets. So then we accept the notion of life after death, the law of karma, etc. Then we accept the notion of working with detachment, gyan, and then as we ask, what else? So that whole chain of what else starts with experiencing the taste of material happiness. So yes, and both of them are essentially symptoms of Krishna's mercy. That Krishna is so merciful that while we have turned our back to him, he's still making arrangements for our happiness. And while he's making those arrangements for their happiness, he's also keeping that channel open for us to come back to him. It's good realization. Thank you for sharing it, Prabhu.
Thank you, Prabhu. Thank you very much. Nice class.
Okay, there are no more questions, comments. We'll stop here. Anchakalpatarubhayascha kripa sindhubhya eva cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Ananta Koti Vaishnavrinda ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Nithai Gaur Premanande. Hari Hari. Hare Krishna. Thank you so much.